Hey folks, I would like to welcome everybody for joining our webinar today. Our webinar today is on revolutionizing B2B returns. And I'm very excited about this particular webinar because the ROI on this is absolutely huge. We all know what a pain in the neck it can be for trying to manage those returns, within the Infor system. And we've got a tremendous partner here with Continuum, which has solved that for us nicely. So my name's Brian Weaver. I'm the Vice President of Sales here at NSA, and I also do vendor management. So I help manage the relationship with our wonderful vendors like Continuum. And one of our presenters today is Alex Witzpalik. So Alex and I have known each other for quite a while, even before he was the CEO of Continuum. Alex has 13 plus years in distribution and has won awards for that as well. So really delighted that Alex is able to join us today. And
Thanks for having me, Brian. Excited.
Terrific. Thank you, Alex. And joining Alex also is going to be Rowan Tasonki. And Rowan actually does the management, a lot of the management of the post-sales effort and constantly looking for efficiencies in terms of the product as well. So we really appreciate the fact that we got Rowan on with us also.
Very nice to be here. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. So through the webinar today, what we're going to do is cover a few different items, and I will ask our presenters to go ahead and expand on this as they choose. But we're going to be uncovering the hidden cost of returns, involving and eliminating costly inefficiencies that impact the bottom line. We're going to talk about real world success stories. So folks are actually out there using this today and, really seeing the ROI on this. So it'll be exciting to learn about that. And you're going to see some logos and so forth, the companies you'll recognize. And the integration into Cloud Suite is the focus of this particular platform. And we're delighted that we have the relationship that we do with these guys. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Most of you know who we are at NSA, but we've been in this particular space and distribution since 1984. We were the very first reseller for the Infor distribution ERP software, which came, by many names over the years. We've got 22 plus years in the space. We've got approximately 20 or so consultants, and they average about 15 years in the space as well. So it's an area that we know extremely well. And with this, what I'd like to do is I'd like to hand it over to Alex to introduce Continuum, and I'll ask you to take it away, Alex. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for the kind words and introduction, Brian. So everyone that we have on the webinar today, I'm excited to take you through. The plan is we'll take you through probably a 10-minute overview. Just kind of set the scene for what we're going to go through today before we get to the demo, and then I'll pass it to Rowan to go through the demonstration. And hang on to the end because there's actually towards the end an offer that we have for Cloud Suite users, specifically NSA members, which we're pretty excited about. So Continuum is the first returns, warranties, and repairs platform for distribution manufacturing companies. And the reality is, I would say 99 out of 100 distributors do not have a budgeted or active project to solve returns and warranties. Right? It's kind of been it's been a thorn in the side of companies that they've lived with for so long. But here's what our customers have found is that there's not many, if any, other projects that can solve three core things that are fundamental to a distribution company. Everyone on this call is a distributor, and so what do we all focus on? Is we focus on profitable growth. How do we grow and how do we grow more profitably? Well, streamlining and automating the returns and warranties process solves three things. One, customer experience challenges, and those show up multifold throughout the process and how customer experience is impacted in the returns process. And we'll give you some real life examples of those. Two is manual labor. Companies so often just they end up saying, well, look, it's so challenging, we have to throw bodies at the problem. And all these vendors have different return policies. I have to manage thousands of customers and their expectations. So this is complicated. So it must have to be manual. So we throw bodies at the problem. And the third one, which I think is the most exciting and most important, is really around the financial impacts that are impacted from having a manual and lack of visibility throughout the entire returns process. And what we talk about with these financial impacts that we see, they really show up in a couple of different ways. They show up in customer AR invoice disputes. So customers get an invoice and they're like, I have an open return. I'm not paying that invoice. And we see this frequently. We'll get into some stories around how we've helped solve this for other customers and some of the experiences that their CFO or finance team had seen. Um, the other side of the coin is if you're crediting your customer right away on defectives or drop ships, and you're then on the hook to go get your credit from your manufacturer. So often we see that there's missed vendor credits all over the place. And actually being able to identify those and tie back the customer return or warranty to the vendor credit and link those two. And so I think it's really those areas where our customers are like, okay, so not only can I refocus my team to things that are of higher value, not only can I deliver a great customer experience, but I'm going to actually drop some dollars straight to my bottom line and increase my cash recognition flow. And I think it's really those moments when companies say, this is a process that actually deserves to be talked about is a top priority inside of our organization, even though prior to today, for most of you on this call, returns and warranties is probably not an active project in your business. But these three things, any executive inside of your organization is going to care about: customer experience, manual labor, and the financial impacts associated. Just kind of bouncing back here. So we work with multiple customers across various different industries and verticals. Um, Cloud Suite, we actually work with a company called Medco Tools. They're one of the largest Milwaukee tool distributors. They sell wholesale. They're a two-step wholesale distributor selling through the automotive and industrial markets. We also work with Tropic Supply in the HVAC market, solving the warranties problem that contractors have to face when you talk about creating warranties back with the manufacturer and getting replacement orders. But we also work with across multiple other verticals. So you can look at PPE, like protective equipment, industrial, automotive, lab equipment, electrical, high tech, and then building materials as well. And we're really vertical agnostic. This challenge exists for really any distribution organization. And it rears its head in different ways in different markets. And we're going to dig into today exactly how we can solve the end-to-end returns challenge that exists for distributors and manufacturers. So, like we said, we know obviously Cloud Suite is geared towards distribution organizations. And the real issue is that distributors, you're actually in the most unfortunate position in the supply chain when you're dealing with returns, right? You're caught in the middle between needing to manage your customers' expectations and needing to adhere to all of your vendor return policies. Okay. So let's say we're dealing with a warranty, a defective, a drop ship type of return. Your end user wants to return that to you. You have a catch-22 decision to make. Do I credit my customer now and wait to get credit from my vendor and need to chase my vendor and make sure that I'm actually tracking that all the way through? Potential risk is missed vendor credits. Or do I tell my customer, no, you need to wait. Let me go get my credit from my manufacturer first, and I'll chase you and I'll give you your credit afterward, which ultimately leads to AR invoice disputes. And so it's really a catch-22 decision, and either one you make is really suboptimal. And so what's interesting about returns is rarely is this really a volume issue. Sometimes it is, but typically it's rarely a volume issue. A return, we have data, it really runs the gamut. We have a customer in the electrical high tech space. They do a lot of drop shipping. So, but they actually did an analysis of the cost per return. Manual labor alone, $177 per return. Doesn't include the cost of logistics, just the cost of the manual labor to process this through their organization. Another data point that we've seen, and we actually did with a company called the Distribution Strategy Group. If any of you know Ian Heller and Jonathan Beim over at Distribution Strategy Group, they're a great partner of ours. We actually recently released our 2024 State of Distributor Returns, and we find is the cost of a return is 8 to 10 times higher than the cost of the original order that you shipped out. And so when you look at your total transaction volume as a distribution organization, you may say, well, it's not that high compared to our order volume, right? Some distributors in certain verticals or markets, we see 1%, 2%, 3%. Other companies, we see a much higher percentage or verticals. But when you're talking about a percent of a lot, it's a lot. And when you're multiplying that by a number that's 8 to 10 times higher than the cost of your original order, this becomes a real drain, an operational drain. It's a parasit. It's very parasitic to your operation. And so how we solve this, and well, I think the beauty of the Continuum platform is the solution is actually separated. So you could say, we want to take this as far in the process as we can, from customer initiation all the way to applying vendor credit, or you could stop at any point in the process. We don't really have a horse in the race. Now, our bet is long term over time. You're going to say, hey, let's continue to solve this throughout the entirety of the process. And so what we've done is we've actually modularized our product into 4 different hubs, and I'll explain exactly what they are. And you'll get a real flavor for this when we jump into the demonstration that Rawan's going to go through. And you'll get a clear idea of exactly how we're solving this end-to-end problem to get rid of the manual labor, deliver on great customer experiences, and eliminate the financial impacts associated. So let's start with the customer hub. What you'll see when we get into the customer hub is this is how customers can self-initiate returns in the platform. So we exist on your website. We can do single sign-on with your website. We can also just be a tab and standalone. But the intent is your customers don't need to remember another username and password to log in. We'll get into those details of how that works. But your customers can now self-initiate returns right on your website. And really the beauty of the customer hub is it educates your customers on what your return policy is. So if there's going to be restocking fees, we're educating them of that. If this is actually non-returnable because it's outside of a certain number of days from original invoice or purchase date, if it requires a certain return location based off of the source or where you ordered it from, or if it's just flat out non-returnable because it was a spot buy. All of that education comes upfront to your customer. So we're actually eliminating the amount of requests that are coming through the platform. And so sometimes people are like, well, are we going to get more returns? We actually see we can reduce the amount of returns by educating your customers upfront. So think about this as your customers can self-initiate. Your internal users can still create the return as well on behalf of your customers. In certain verticals, the reality is some customers won't create returns or warranties on their own. We understand that. We have a company up in Canada, the company called G2S Towback. They're one of the largest Milwaukee tool distributors in Canada. And they had a returns team of 4 before they even rolled this out to their customers. So meaning they were still creating returns internally. They reduced the returns team to about 1.5. So more than 50% labor reduction associated with returns. And a big reason for that is all of the logic that you have to think through when you're adding a return. Where should this go back to? Is this a defective? Does it need to get vendor engagement? And all of that logic lives in the customer hub, which you'll see when we get into the demonstration. And you could now literally hire a CSR off the street and they could process returns. Where we have customers they're like, oh yeah, we have 18 different SOPs for our returns. I mean, standard operating procedures. based off vendor, based off scenario, based off this. And it's like all of those things prevent you from scale and being able to bring people into your business. And so with this, it becomes like an Amazon type return, but handles all of that business logic and workflow on the back end. And then we have the warehouse and receiving hub, which is actually if you're receiving these products in, actually drivers and fleet will use this as well. So you can actually have chain of custody. One of our customers in the electrical industry, EECO, one of their big challenges was your driver. They had their own fleet. Driver would show up to a job, and the customer's like, I just need to get this product off the job. The driver wasn't expecting to receive a return. They're trying to deliver a product. And 30 days later, customer's like, hey, I'm not paying this invoice. I gave that product to your driver. Why didn't I get credit? And somewhere in the process, the return got lost. And so we provide visibility all the way through the logistics of receiving this into the warehouse, from the driver into the warehouse, and actually make that receiving process in the warehouse a hell of a lot easier and a lot more visibility. There's a lot we'll go deeper into specifically around the warehouse hub, and I'll talk to a couple scenarios when Rowan's going through the demonstration. Then we have the vendor and finance hub, which again, you're going to see this in the demonstration, but this is essentially taking a customer return and we can apply for the vendor credit, creating the return PO or the vendor inventory return in Cloud Suite, and apply the credit back down into Cloud Suite. And we can build automation depending on your rules. Do you wait to give credit to your customer till we get credit from your manufacturer? If so, we can have that auto trigger. But the big key here is now we can start to identify where have we given credit to our customers versus where have we gotten credit from our vendors, and really start to identify. Because today you probably can do it at a high level. You know, how many open vendor credits do we have? How many credits did we give? But trying to drill down to the individual scenario and tying them out, lots of lack of visibility there. And then the last hub is the manufacturer warranty hub, which is really tying in your vendor supply chain. And this is a scenario that we're doing with Ream, and we do this a lot in the HVAC space. We're continuing to build out the integrations into the manufacturer warranty portals so that we can actually start to give end user contractors the ability to self-create warranty claims, see our products under warranty, identify replacement parts, and create that process without you having to have humans managing that process manually. So, wanted to kind of give that context before we hop into a demonstration. A couple of examples. I'm sliding back here. What I find interesting is so often, what's interesting is many times you think about like who in your organization would champion a project like this. It's like a blessing and a curse because returns touch so many departments, right? Sales, CSR, warehouse, purchasing for the vendor credit, return POs, finance, e-commerce, if you have an e-commerce team. Oftentimes when we look at this project, like for example, Radians, their biggest proponent, the biggest champion in there is actually their finance team. Their CFO is the biggest champion, saying, look, there's too many financial impacts, too slow to get cash recognition back to vendors, trying to close out books. That is a big opportunity. You know, in other companies, they look at it and it's actually their chief digital officer, like Banner Solutions. So, hey, they thought about this in the digital strategy. So as you think about your business, the different hubs that I went through will speak to different people in the business. Our entry point inside of your organization could really be one of 3 different business unit leaders, and we could just start the conversation there and expand it over time. So the last point I'll make is this product, as you go through it, is modular. So we don't have to solve the end-to-end problem right away. We can start small and grow it over time. Rowan, I tried to cover as much as I can in as short a period as I could. I think I went longer than I was supposed to. But anything I missed?
No, I think you did a great job capturing everything. Although if you did steal my thunder, people will let us know. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and then we could take it from there. Okay, Alex, can you see my screen?
Yes.
I can see your screen. Yep.
All right, perfect. So I'm now going to actually add visuals to everything that Alex walked us through. I'll go through 3 of our hubs today. I'll be showing you the customer hub, the warehouse hub, and the vendor and finance hub. Please, as we go along, if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat, and we have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So I'll go ahead and walk you through it here. But really, if you think about everything that I'm going to be showing you, just link it back to really the bottom line problems that we're trying to solve within your organization, which I'll walk you through. But here we have our customer portal. And as Alex mentioned, they could have a username and password that they could log into. We could have a quick return enabled where they could go and just, if they have an invoice number, order number, and a customer ID, they could go ahead and add a quick return that way. Or if you already have your own e-commerce site that they're already logged into, we would bypass this page and use single sign-on to have them go from your e-commerce straight into Continuum to create returns. If I log in here as a customer, they now have the ability to create returns with you, and they're also going to have the ability to see all their returns that they have initiated with you. And I'll go through that in a little bit. But everything that I'm going to show you here is configurable. So really, we're trying to streamline the process with all these different departments. So it's going to be crucial for your entire team to essentially have full visibility, as at the same time we're eliminating the manual effort that your team is now putting into some of these returns. So let's say here we go ahead and say, hey, your customer wants to initiate a return against this order number. We are going to be integrated to Cloud Suite, your ERP system, pulling that information back. We're now telling them, okay, this is all the details we get from your ERP system here, showing them that these are all the line items that they can now initiate returns against. You're going to notice here that some of these lines are highlighted red, and Alex talked about how we implement your business rules, your logic to educate your customers when they're creating these returns with you. So for example, here we could say, hey, this item is not eligible for return. So your customer understands that we can't necessarily process a return here. However, we could also add different things. So we know it's not a cookie cutter. We know your customers are snowflakes. So what I mean by that is if your customer says, hey, this item is not eligible for return. However, your customer is one of your top tiered customers, you tend to give them some exceptions. We could highlight this red, let them know, hey, this is not eligible for return, but for that specific customer, we could still allow them to add it to a return basket where you can potentially deny it if need be. Alternatively, we're also keeping track. So one of the biggest things I hear from our customers is, hey, a lot of returns get submitted to our team, but it's really difficult if it's not documented properly in a spreadsheet or somewhere where everyone can see. It's really difficult to see if, let's say, this item has been returned against previously or not. So Continuum is keeping track of all these items that have been returned previously, so your customers do not initiate returns against items you've already credited them for. So think of this as a way to educate your customers. We have a bunch of different things that we can talk about here, but for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and say I, as a customer, would want to return this item here, not the parent, but a component of this assembly. And I want to go ahead and initiate a return against this item here. So again, everything that I'm showing here is configurable, so you can go ahead and configure this as you wish. So for example, if you say, hey, I don't want my customer to return children components, they could only return the full item or nothing at all. That is something that we can easily do here. When creating a return, most of the time, your team is probably doing back and forth emails with the customer, asking them why they want to return it, how they want to resolve the issue. We're going to build that here through our problem description, and everything that you see here is going to trigger different workflows. So for example, if your customers are just returning things because they want to change their mind, or they ordered too many and now they want it back and off their plate, we could go ahead and add an automatic restocking fee like Alex mentioned. If let's say they say, hey, it's a defective item and I want a replacement, well, let's get a little bit more information on that. Do you want standard shipping or advanced shipping? So these tiered reason codes are not only going to be a way for you to capture more data on your customers and the returns that you're getting over and over again, but we're capturing all that. So you now, when you manage a return, which I'll show you, have everything that you need to be able to, yes, authorize for its return, adjust it, scrap it, return it, credit it, you name it. So I'm going to go here and say, please ship ASAP. The one thing I'm going to highlight here is these reason codes are not static. They can be different based on your vendors. They can be different based on your customers. So for example, Banner Solutions, one of our customers, have 2 large vendors that offer repairs. So if we here see that this part number is being sold by one of those vendors, one of our drop down here is actually going to offer to the customer, hey, do you want to repair this? Yes or no. But since other vendors don't offer that, we're not going to show them that reason code. So that's what I mean by it can be dynamic based on different rules that we put in place. So your team doesn't have to remember those rules going back to those 18 SOPs. And going back to Alex's comment of training someone is not going to be a headache because they could come here and it's going to be a guided approach when creating these returns. Last step here I'm going to do is accept terms and conditions. That's going to be your fine print and submit the return. So not only did we put the onus on your customer to create the return and have a portal to see everything and be guided throughout the whole approach, but we're also going ahead and creating that return merchandise in CSD on behalf of your team. So if you think about it today, if they're receiving an email, a phone call, or it's just showing up at your warehouse, all that gets eliminated because we're now putting the onus on the customer to create that return. We're getting back that return merchandise number from CSD and displaying it here. So it's a one-to-one, and your team gets an email notification letting them know, hey, you now have a return that is requested. Please go ahead and manage that return, which I'll show you shortly. So that's from an RMA creation standpoint, and that really puts the RMA on the map for your team to now manage it. So I'm going to show you and jump into the second piece of our customer hub, which is your internal staff members. So your internal staff members are going to be able to see all the RMAs that are being created. They now have the ability to also create returns on behalf of customers. So customers that will still email you or call you, they still have a way to manage to create returns on behalf of them, which if I click here is going to look very similar to what your customers see. If we go on the history screen, your team now has the ability to see all the statuses, the customer IDs, who it's assigned to internally. This is going to be crucial. We want to make sure that the chain of custody is being monitored at all times. Everyone knows who's managing that return and at what stage is it, so everyone knows who's accountable. Your entire company could be using Continuum to see the status of a return, where we're at. They could have different filtering options and capabilities to filter on what's assigned to them specifically. They could now go ahead and also save those views as well. They could save it privately with them or for everyone. And that way they could pin their saved views and see them as well when they log in. So think of this as workflows for your each and individual departments to be able to come in here and manage what they need to do for returns. Okay, if we skip to the line view here, you're going to be able to see invoice linking, authorization, receiving. There's a $ for crediting that is not part of my demonstration. But because we're having a one-stop shop for all your internal staff members to see where we're at with a return, we're going to be able to show them what we're also doing in CSD. So think of this as a window that shows them what we're doing in their ERP system so that they themselves don't have to keep logging into their ERP system to make any changes. If we go into a specific RMA here, the team now has full visibility into what the reason code is, any internal messages or any messages that were left by the customer. They also have the ability to see part numbers, quantities that they could edit. And the best part here is now they get to take that return through the life cycle. These statuses are all going to be configured by you. You get to decide what these statuses are, and these statuses can differ depending on what return type this is. So remember how we said reason codes can trigger different workflows? So if let's say your customer selects a repair, then this would be a repair return type, which would have a completely different life cycle than if this was a stock return or a return going back to your vendor.
Yeah, and I would say the only other thing is like we have customers where we have a set of logic that says, well, if it meets these conditions, then just go ahead and auto approve this to come back. And we're setting the default return location. we're sending them an email and letting them know, here's where you can send it. Here's the acknowledgement. So like we can have a high degree of automation in, how much do you want to flow through? Other companies are like, I don't want returns just automatically flowing through. Like I want to review everything before we send it back. So it's totally configurable up to you on how you want to handle that piece of things. And then I think the real thing is like CSRs, all they need to do now is just live in this queue and they just look at the details, look at the notes, look at pictures, and they just authorize or deny or request more information right from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. So that brings us to our second hub. So now your CSRs can come and manage this return lifecycle and say, you know what, I'm going to now authorize this for the customer to ship it back to this return location. Once we go ahead and change that lifecycle and we change that status, we're going to trigger automatic email notifications to your customer, letting them know, hey, we now have authorized for you to ship this back to Pace International. And here is an RMA acknowledgement. And the RMA acknowledgement is going to contain a QR code that your warehouse team can now leverage. And I'm going to jump into the warehouse hub to show that. So that's our second hub for today's webinar. So the warehouse hub is just going to be a toggle here that you click on, and you're automatically going to see all the items that have been successfully received or still testing or authorized awaiting transit. All these statuses can be configured for you. So for example, if you have a fleet of drivers that go and actually pick up material from your customers and they're not shipping it back to you, you could also have a status that says picked up by driver, so on and so forth. But you're going to see here scan QR code on the top. So when items are now shipped back to your warehouse team, because we have a digital trail of that RMA and the RMA acknowledgement was sent to your customer and they ship it back to you or hand it off to your driver or your warehouse team can now scan that QR code that's on the RMA acknowledgement that will take them exactly to the RMA details. That scanning can happen using their cell phones, using their scanning guns, or even their essentially tablets that they could have also on site. If we go ahead and look at any of these items here, they're going to be able to see that all the details that were present by the customer or by the CSR. So this is a defective item. Item is defective. They need a replacement. They added an image of the item. Clearly, it's on fire. It needs to be returned. Your warehouse team can add inspection notes, inspection documents, and they could move it through their own life cycle now. So they could go ahead and say, hey, testing is complete on this item. It is good or it's defective. And they're leaving all these notes for the CSRs, the finance team. Everyone can now see the status of what this item is. But we now also will have the ability to allow them to partially receive. So if your customers are shipping 3, 4, 10 items, 2 of them are in good condition, 8 of them are not, your team can go ahead and split the lines into individual lines, and they could go ahead and say, I'm disputing 8, but I'm successfully receiving the rest. Also, if you have a warehouse management system like TWL, for example, we have the ability to integrate to that as well with the help of NSA. So we could also manage the warehouse hub with TWL 2-in-1. We could talk more about that as well if that's relevant to you. So with the warehouse hub, this is allowing your warehouse team to now receive items in. It's going to allow everyone in your organization to see when items have been successfully received in and not sitting in the side of the warehouse where no one knows about it and your customers asking so many different questions about it. And we're also allowing everything to be connected with respect to notes and the workflow. So your CSR knows what they need to work on. Your warehouse team knows exactly what they need to work on. And then the final piece of this is going to be our vendor and finance hub, which I'll jump into shortly. Alex, I see you came off mute. If there's anything you'd like to add before I jump into that.
Well, I would just say most of our customers, like they had some sort of spreadsheet that their warehouse was having to work out of, that their CSR group, like a shared Excel doc. And when they'd have dispute, so like let's say customer says this is completely fine, comes back, warehouse looks at it, they're like, they clearly installed this and pulled it out with a screwdriver, like they janked this thing up. You certainly don't want your warehouse going back to the customer. And so that whole dispute process kicks a workflow back out to the CSR. And so all these hubs, and sometimes customers are like, oh, well, it's all one platform. They're all inside the same platform. They're just different hubs. So the communication's in a single spot. So when you get in as a finance leader, if you ever get that invoice dispute, you can see the entire life cycle of what happened. And we're connecting the communication between the warehouse and the CSR, where a lot of teams today were living out of a spreadsheet trying to do that. Um, the other thing I think you mentioned, Rowan, but like these work with almost all RF guns, the QR code that we have. So your team doesn't have to have, as long as you have them. Depends. We'll have to look at the hardware that you have. If you have it hooked up to a monitor, or if you have, a screen right on those things. But this is all mobile responsive as well. So we have teams in the warehouse using this on, they buy some sort of tablet potentially for a warehouse, or they use their current RF guns. It's really up to you on how you want to use this. But it basically becomes a one-click receiving. If your warehouse team looks at this and like everything's good, one click, I receive this in, done. And we can pull back the bins that are in Cloud Suite or in TWL to automatically assign these products to the correct bins as well, if you have the bin locations in the item maintenance stored. So there's a lot of different options and configurations here for a higher degree of automation. But I think the real value, like where the cost comes in returns, is like the scenarios that are not the standard. So like it comes back and like this item is not what they said they were going to be sending back. How do we get that communication, that workflow streamlined between your customer, your CSR, and your warehouse? And this really enables that.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Okay, so the last and final hub that I'll be showing today is our vendor and finance hub. So if you think about your own returns that are coming into the business, some of them are stock returns, some of them are vendor returns. And I think unanimously, most people are going to say vendor returns cause us a little bit more heartburn than stock returns. And the reason for that is most of the time when you receive a customer return and you have to decide whether or not it goes back to stock or it goes back to your vendor, you have different teams that are responsible for different things. You have your CSR team that is responsible for taking care of your customer. You have your purchasing team, and it could be, there could be overlap there depending on how your process is in your organization. But you have the purchasing team responsible to going back out to the vendor to get information and to get approval. And then you have your finance team applying the vendor credit. And if you try to go and ask someone, where are we at with our customer versus where are we at with the vendor, you could get some answers here and there. Most of the time, it's not unanimous. Most of the time is let me check, let me ask, let me go do that. Here is where you now are going to have a side-by-side view of where you're at with your customer returns and where you're at with your vendors. If we switch to the line view, you're also going to be able to see all those different highlighted features here, but you're going to be able to see, okay, in this instance, we've received credit from the vendor, but we haven't credited our customer. So this is going to be crucial for you to be able to see the delta between what money are you losing, what money are you leaving off the table, what extra money that you have that you haven't credited your customer. All that becomes available for you in one view. So with the vendor and finance hub here, if you click on, let's say this is a customer return that came in, you now have the ability to create a new vendor return for that customer. Here, you could select the vendor that you want to essentially initiate the return with or the return request, and you could go ahead and request just a simple email initiating from Continuum asking your vendor for approval. So here's all the reason codes we captured from your customer, the customer notes, the part in question, you add an email address, and you're asking for essentially a vendor authorization or an RGA authorization number. This can vary between one vendor to the other. But what can help you here is now you have a way to follow up with your vendor without having to follow up, if you know what I mean. So here you get to decide whether or not you want to follow up daily, every other day, every week, so on and so forth. And Continuum takes care of those follow-ups for you. So if you have a specific stubborn vendor that you deal with, or a manufacturer that takes a little bit more time before they could get back to you, that require a few reminders, we're going to take care of that here. And once you get that information back, you now have the ability to either batch your customer returns to create a return PO or create a new vendor return PO from the information that we have. But it all lives in one spot, and your purchasing has full visibility, your finance team has full visibility, and everyone gets to see where you're at with your customer versus where you're at with your vendor. And if you are also able to return items to your vendor that have nothing to do with customer returns, if you think about, let's say, batched annual stock returns, or even just items that show up to your warehouse from your vendor and they're already defective, and you haven't even sold it to your customer yet, and you want to initiate a return that way, you now have the ability to also initiate returns against your inventory, not just from customer returns. So you could go ahead and select the vendor that you want to initiate a return with, and you say, hey, these are all the items, or these are all the item IDs that we want to essentially initiate a return PO against.
Yeah, I think the customers that are using the vendor and finance hub, they definitely love the return from customer returns for sure. But also when you're talking about the annual buyback scenario, like what Rowan was just talking about from inventory, and you may have some vendors where they're like, hey, I don't want onesie, twosie returns back, so palletize it, hold it until you get 15, 20, or you just fill a pallet. And so you'll just receive that into like some sort of custom bin that you may have created or something like that. Here we can basically have a holding queue for all that to sit. So when it's ready, when that pallet is stored, you just press a button and it's ready to go. It creates that return PO to your vendor. But the other piece of this is like, if you're talking about an annual buyback and you're doing that process with a vendor, you're trying to clean up your inventory levels across your across your branch locations or just in your warehouse. That's usually some sort of negotiation, right? Where they're like, oh, uh, we'll approve this return if you make a PO of equal or greater value, right? And that takes some negotiation or communication internally. So having that visibility to that communication, getting internal stakeholders aligned to those things are key on the annual buyback scenario. Just being able to have that life cycle tracked. One of the customers we have, they're like, we basically negotiate with the vendor, but then we have to negotiate internally that like this branch manager is going to be okay with us getting rid of this inventory. And so giving that visibility across the organization of what's queued up and where we're at in that life cycle, both on the customer return and on the vendor return, just level sets everyone in the organization.
Okay. So this concludes our customer hub, our warehouse hub, and our vendor and finance hub. We do have some time available for Q&A. So I do encourage, if you have any questions, please let us know and we'll be happy to take those on. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then we can see if there are any questions in the chat.
Yeah, I don't see any at present, Rowan, but thank you so much for that demo. It was very, very impactful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Oh. Okay. Typically people ask questions around things like how do you integrate to Cloud Suite, right? So typically we're using the APIs that Cloud Suite has. Like even when we're hosting invoice history, we're getting that via an API. And we'll pull that data back. So everything's using the Cloud Suite API. Some people ask, hey, will this work with, maybe we're not on Cloud Suite yet. We do suggest you move to Cloud Suite before we do a project. We can do with an SXE, but there are version requirements when you're on SXE of doing that. So obviously the migration to Cloud Suite makes this much closer to plug and play on this. And the other thing is, if there's any HVAC members, people in the HVAC industry, a lot of what we showed today was really return related. We didn't get deep into the warranty part, which has added components around integration to your manufacturer, their warranty portal, creating replacement orders, a little bit different workflow that we didn't have quite time to show today. But those are some things that typically people would ask or have questions around.
Hey, Alex, we do have a couple other questions as well. So, what type of customer support and training does Continuum offer?
That's my
Rowan,
team.
I'll let you answer. Yeah, I can answer, but Rowan's team does that.
So part of our implementation, my team is responsible for delivering the solution that we provided to you during the evaluation and understanding your business rules, understanding your logic, understanding your pain points, and designing a solution for that. So we're responsible for delivering that piece. Once my team gets that requirements gathering done, we go ahead and build your portal for you, and then we release essentially a test environment that is connected to your Cloud Suite test environment, and those two talk to each other in real time. So when you create returns and you're testing through all the different things, whether they're reason codes, statuses, actions in Cloud Suite, you're testing all that, and we're then gathering feedback to make any changes. During our UAT release, we are owning all the training. So it could be a one training depending on how many hubs you purchase. So if it's the customer hub, we could do one to multiple trainings depending on if you rolled it out to multiple branches or a single branch. So we own that entire training process, and we train your internal staff, all the different departments. We also provide custom user guides specifically for your internal staff, as well as FAQs. And then we also have a support team that manages any technical support tickets that you may raise during that process. And you also get an assigned client success manager who then ensures your continued success with Continuum after you go live, and trains you on any new feature releases or updates that we do.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Rowan. And I can tell folks that are on this call that, we've had multiple customers that have gone with Continuum and seen a very smooth process on that entire end of it. Here's another good question. How is pricing and subscription structured? So how is it purchased?
Yeah, so it's really based off of the volume of transactions that you're planning to put through the platform. So that's one. And the more transactions you do, the lower the cost per transaction, right? So if you do 100 returns a year, your cost per return is going to be higher than if you do 10,000 returns a year. The other variable to that is the number of hubs that you have. So if you have the customer hub, warehouse hub, and vendor and finance hub, that's 3 hubs that you'd be paying for, but it's purely based off volume. We find that to be the way that we right size the value with the value that you're getting. And then I think Rowan had mentioned this earlier in the call that we don't price this by user, because ultimately it just wouldn't be fair, right? Because customers, your salespeople want to create returns. They want to see the status of a return. You want your salespeople checking if there's a dispute on a return before they walk into a sales call. So like sometimes we feed this into CRMs. We do that with HubSpot or HubSpot and Salesforce. You'll want customer service, warehouse, finance, purchasing, everyone on the platform. So we do not charge by user. Typically, anyone who touches a client, they're on the platform inside of an organization.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex. I think that makes a lot of sense as well, for, basically paying based on the volume that you've got. This is a real good ROI question here. What measurable outcomes have other distributors achieved after implementing Continuum, and how long does it take to see these results?
So the measurable results, the easiest thing to measure is the human capital side of things, because we can literally take teams and watch them be able to repurpose the team to other things in the business. So it's probably the easiest, most quantifiable area out at the very jump. But what I find interesting is is because people they don't have data. Distributors don't have data on the number of AR invoice disputes that they have today. Like you're not like, okay, hey, because of returns, we have a lag of this much cash recognition every single month or every quarter. So it's a little harder to quantify that. And then the vendor credit side, we can actually take, and we're increasing the speed of credit, getting vendor credit by at least 50%, which drops straight to your bottom line. And I think even better than that is we're increasing by 20% the likelihood that you're actually getting your vendor credit. So take your vendor credit, outstanding balance, multiply that by 20 points, whatever it is over a year. It's pretty significant to go eliminate that vendor credit missing side. Now, um, so it's a long way of putting it. When we go through in a evaluation process, we actually build out ROI models based off of some industry benchmarks. And we're typically, it's all said and done, by the end of the project, we're typically north of 400% ROI.
That's an amazing number. And I can certainly see, you'd mentioned early on during the session today that, the cost of a return for one of the distributors was calculated to be like $178. I'll bet a lot of distributors don't really know what that cost looks like today, but that makes
They
a lot
were
of
a
sense.
rare one. They actually brought someone in. It was one of the first projects they had them do, is like monitor it all the way through their organization. It was cool that they had done that already. But yeah, I'd say you're right. Like most distribution companies have not gone through that process.
Absolutely. Well, that sounds great. I don't see any other questions at the moment, so I would still invite folks to enter into chat. We'll make sure we get them addressed. We got a few minutes left to go, but we do have a special offer that was mentioned earlier. And Alex, if you've got the ability to maybe bring up that particular element of the PowerPoint, we'll go ahead and
Yeah,
cover
let
that
me
off.
pull that up.
And while Alex is doing that, I'll just mention to everybody on the call here that we are recording today's session, and everybody should be receiving that copy of the recording. And of course, you'll have the special offer as well that's going to be in that email, and that should get to you here by the close of business on Friday.
All right, here we go. I just wanted to add some suspense, Brian. That's all.
No worries. Yeah, so first and foremost, I'd like to thank Continuum for a very offer that they put. Most folks that attend the NSA webinars know that we try to, work a nice special offer with the vendors, and some of those are better than others. This is certainly one of the better ones. So great appreciation to you guys for this. But in honor of the partnership, they're offering a special promotion to NSA customers. Sign up before December 31st, and they will waive 100% of the service fees. So we want to make sure you guys don't miss this opportunity. By all means, contact NSA. The contact information is there at the bottom of the screen. You can certainly also feel free to contact Continuum as well. But Alex, do you want to talk a little bit more as to what I guess the service fees might entail, and a little bit more about what that is, so that folks have a better understanding of it? That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I do that, in the spirit of transparency, there's one caveat, which is assuming there's no custom integrations we need to build, right? So assuming we don't need to custom integrate to your CRM, your homegrown CRM. We don't need to go custom integrate to a manufacturer portal that you have, like something net new, right? So assuming there's nothing custom, that we need to do. Now, configure is different than custom, right? So your workflows are configurable. What we're doing in the ERP is configurable. So it's really around, as long as we're integrating to only NSA, or sorry, to Cloud Suite and TWL standard things, we are willing to waive 100% of the service fees, which is it's a pretty big give. On average, our services fees on average are about 20 grand, on, some give or take, depending on the scope of the project and size. So it's a pretty significant offer. And you might say, well, like, how does this work? For us, we're looking at it and we've actually put together a marketing pool. It's actually going to be coming out of our marketing budget. And so basically our marketing team is paying that out of their budget for this. And it's meaningful, right? So, for us, it's, we're going to take a haircut in year one on the project, but we're in this for the long game. We understand, the partnership with NSA and the customers that we already have. And we just want to continue to build the momentum that we've already built. And so we, at the moment, like we couldn't even take a project on before the end of the new year. So we have projects that we're slating out starting in the middle of January now. So even if you're making it up, you signed up today, you'd be only paying for subscription. There would be no services fees, which is pretty great part of this. And you'd be live again, assuming we're not building any custom integrations. We're going directly to Cloud Suite and TWO only. You could still make a major impact for almost all of 2025 because we can be able to get you live in less than 30 days now with Cloud Suite, which is really, really incredible. So, yeah, it's impactful and it's meaningful. It's not like, hey, we'll give you 10% off. Like, it's real dollars and something that we'd be happy to have marketing pay for.
Well, that's fantastic. And certainly encourage anybody to take advantage of this. Please reply back to us. We'll go ahead and set up that meeting and we'll get things started. But we know what that return process looks like today for most folks. So to me, this looks like, a fairly much a no-brainer for folks, especially with the offer that we have. I'd like to give a special thanks to Alex and Erwan, for basically presenting today's session. I think it was incredibly impactful. We hope you found it as well. Thank you for the time out of your day on this. And we will look forward to getting this information to you shortly. And we'll give you back another couple of minutes here to the top of the hour. Thank you, folks.
Brian, thanks for having us. Bye.
All right, bye.